The hospital room was eerily quiet except for the steady beep of the heart monitor beside my bed. 3 weeks of intensive care had left me disconnected from the outside world. Little did I know that while I was fighting for my life after the accident, my brother Alex was in our father's office, signing documents that would transfer control of Meridian Innovations, the company our father had built from nothing over 30 years, entirely to himself. I still remember the smug look on his face when he visited me that day, bringing the obligatory flowers and well wishes. He'd squeezed my hand, telling me not to worry about anything, that the company was being taken care of. There was something in his eyes I couldn't quite place then. A gleam of triumph, perhaps? I was too weak, too medicated to recognize what it meant. But Alex didn't know about the hidden safe behind the vintage map in Dad's study, the one Dad had shown only me during our late-night strategy sessions. He didn't know about the documents tucked inside, the contingency plans, the real succession strategy, or the letter Dad had written just weeks before his sudden heart attack. Alex thought he'd won, that he'd seized everything while I lay helpless in a hospital bed. He had no idea what was coming. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Meridian Innovations has always been more than just a company to me. Growing up, I'd spent countless afternoons sitting cross-legged on the floor of Dad's home office, watching him review blueprints and financial projections while I did my homework. The company was his legacy, but he'd made it clear it would someday be our shared inheritance, mine and Alex's. Engineering excellence with integrity, Dad would say, his voice full of pride as he explained how he'd built the company from a small workshop in our garage to one of the leading engineering firms in the Pacific Northwest. I'd chosen to study engineering specifically to follow in his footsteps, while Alex had gone the finance route. My name is Ellie Mercer, and until 6 months ago, I was the Chief Innovation Officer at Meridian, working alongside my father, James Mercer, who despite being in his 60s, still ran the company with the same passion and attention to detail that had made it successful. Alex, my older brother by 4 years, served as CFO, handling the financial side while Dad and I focused on engineering and product development. We were the perfect team. At least that's what I thought. The morning of the accident was ordinary in every way. I remember stopping for coffee at the small cafe near our Seattle headquarters, chatting with Monica, the barista who knew my usual order by heart. It was raining, typical spring weather in the Northwest, and I was reviewing project notes on my tablet while waiting at a crosswalk. That's when everything changed. The screeching tires, the flash of headlights, the impact that sent me flying. After that, darkness. I woke up 3 days later in the hospital, my body broken in multiple places, fractured ribs, broken leg, internal injuries that required emergency surgery. The doctors told me I was lucky to be alive. Through the haze of pain medication, I learned that Dad had been by my side almost constantly, barely leaving except when Alex insisted he get some rest. Dad's taking it really hard, Alex told me during one of my more lucid moments. The company's in chaos without you both there. I'm doing my best to hold things together. I tried to focus on healing, but couldn't help worrying about Meridian. Dad and I had been in the middle of finalizing our newest product line, an innovative series of sustainable water filtration systems that could be game-changing for communities with limited access to clean water. It was the kind of project that perfectly embodied our company's mission, profitable innovation that made a difference in the world. Don't worry about any of that, Alex insisted whenever I brought up work. Just focus on getting better. A week into my hospital stay, Dad came to visit, looking exhausted but relieved to see me improving. He sat beside my bed, his weathered hands, a builder's hands, gently holding mine. "I've been thinking, Ellie," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "This accident, it's made me realize how fragile everything is. I need to make sure Meridian's future is secure no matter what happens. Dad, I'm going to be fine, I assured him, though even talking was painful with my cracked ribs. He nodded, but his eyes were distant. I know you will. You've always been a fighter, but I'm making some changes to our succession plan just to be safe. That was the last significant conversation I had with my father. The next morning, while sitting in his home office reviewing documents, he suffered a massive heart attack. By the time his housekeeper found him, it was too late. I received the news in my hospital bed, unable even to attend my own father's funeral. The grief was overwhelming, made worse by my physical confinement and the medications that kept me drifting between consciousness and uneasy sleep. Alex handled all the arrangements, the memorial service, and, as I would later discover, much more. During those foggy days of grief and recovery, I had visitors from the company, my assistant Claire, the head of engineering Marco, and other colleagues who brought flowers and shared stories about Dad. But increasingly, Alex would appear just as they arrived, hurrying them along with comments about my need for rest. The doctors say too much stimulation isn't good for your recovery, he'd insist, giving my colleagues pointed looks until they made their excuses and left. In my more lucid moments, I noticed the frequency of Alex's visits changing. Initially, there daily, he began to come every other day, then just twice a week. When he did visit, he was often distracted, constantly checking his phone, cutting our conversations short. Things are hectic at Meridian, he'd explain. Someone has to keep the ship afloat. I was 3 weeks into my hospital stay when Claire managed to visit while Alex was in a meeting he couldn't reschedule. My assistant's normally cheerful face was tight with worry as she closed the door to my room and pulled her chair close to my bed. Ellie, something's happening at Meridian, she whispered, glancing nervously at the door. Alex has moved into your father's office. He's reassigned. Staff canceled the water filtration project and brought in consultants from Vertex Capital. Vertex Capital, one of our competitors that had been trying to acquire Meridian for years, specifically to dismantle it and absorb our patents and client list. That doesn't make sense, I said, struggling to sit up straighter. Dad would never work with Vertex. They represent everything he stood against. Profit at any cost. No consideration for ethical impact. Claire nodded, pulling a folded paper from her purse. That's not all. I overheard Alex on the phone yesterday. He was talking about a board meeting to formalize his position as CEO and... She hesitated. To remove you from your position, citing medical incapacity. The paper she handed me was an internal memo announcing a reorganization of Meridian's leadership structure, with Alex as the new CEO, and a note that my role would be reassessed pending medical evaluation. At the bottom was a copy of my father's signature, one that looked slightly off from the signature I knew so well. This can't be legal, I whispered, my heart racing. Dad always intended for us to run the company together. He told me he was updating the succession plan, but not like this. Claire squeezed my hand. There's more. The rumor is that Alex found a new will in your father's desk, one that gives him controlling interest in the company. It was witnessed by Victor Prentice. Victor Prentice, Alex's friend since college, and a lawyer whose ethical standards had always been questionable at best. The door to my room opened suddenly, and Claire jumped, quickly taking the paper back and shoving it into her purse. Alex stood in the doorway, his expression darkening when he saw who was with me. Claire, shouldn't you be at work? There's a mountain of paperwork on your desk, he said coldly. I was just leaving, Claire replied, standing. She gave my hand one more squeeze. Take care, Ellie. Call if you need anything. After she left, Alex turned to me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The doctors say you might be able to go home next week. I've arranged for a home health nurse to help with your recovery. Alex, I said carefully, Claire mentioned some changes at Meridian. A reorganization? His expression hardened momentarily before smoothing into practiced concern. Just temporary measures while you recover. No need to worry about any of that. Right now. And the water filtration project? Dad and I were weeks away from finalizing the prototype. Alex sighed, checking his watch. That project was draining resources we don't have. The preliminary cost analyses weren't promising. That's not true, I countered, feeling my strength returning with my anger. I reviewed those analyses with Dad myself. The project was viable and aligned perfectly with our mission. Things change, Alex said dismissively. Dad's gone, Ellie, and Meridian needs to adapt to survive. Now, I have a meeting to get to. The nurse will be in soon with your medication. As he left, I realized with sudden clarity that I was in a race against time, trapped in this hospital bed, while Alex systematically dismantled everything Dad and I had built together. But despite my weakness, despite the pain that still coursed through my body with every movement, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would not let him get away with this. What Alex didn't know, what Dad had never told him, was that my father and I shared more than just a passion for engineering. We shared a deep distrust of those who valued profit over people. And we had planned for contingencies that Alex couldn't possibly imagine. It was time to access those plans. Days following Claire's visit were a blur of physical therapy sessions, medical evaluations, and carefully planned conversations. I needed information, allies, and most importantly, a way out of this hospital bed. My injuries were healing, but not fast enough. Every hour I spent confined here was another hour Alex had to solidify his control over Meridian. Dr. Sharma, my primary physician, was making her usual rounds when I asked the question I'd been rehearsing in my mind. When can I be discharged? I tried to keep the desperation out of my voice. I need to take care of some urgent personal matters. Dr. Sharma studied me over her glasses, her expression thoughtful. Medically speaking, you're improving, but you still need monitoring and rehabilitation. Your injuries were significant. Ellie, I understand that, I said, but I can't stay here any longer. My father's company, my company, is being dismantled while I'm stuck in this bed. Something in my tone must have conveyed the urgency of my situation. Dr. Sharma sat on the edge of my bed, lowering her voice. Is everything all right at home? You seem distressed about more than just your recovery. I hesitated, then decided to trust her with a partial truth. My brother is making business decisions that go against my father's wishes. Decisions that can't be undone if I don't intervene soon. Dr. Sharma nodded slowly. I see. Well, from a medical perspective, you could be discharged with proper home care arrangements. You'd need a nurse, physical therapy, and someone to assist you, but it would be against my recommendation for at least another week. I'll sign whatever waiver you need, I said immediately, and I'll arrange for all the necessary care, gave me a long look before sighing. I'll start the paperwork, but promise me you won't overexert yourself. Your body still needs time to heal. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. After Dr. Sharma left, I called the one person I knew I could trust implicitly, my godfather, Howard Bennett. Dad's oldest friend and a retired corporate lawyer, Howard had been a constant presence throughout my life. He answered on the second ring. Ellie, is everything all right? His familiar gravelly voice was immediately concerned. No, I admitted, keeping my voice low. I need your help, Howard. It's about Meridian and Alex. I explained everything. The accident, Dad's death, Alex's power grab, and my suspicions about the new will. Howard was silent for a long moment after I finished. When he spoke, his voice had an edge I'd rarely heard before. I always told James that Alex had too much of your mother in him. All ambition, no moral compass. My mother had left when I was 5, abandoning our family for a wealthy real estate developer. Alex, being older, had been more affected by her presence and her absence. "I need to get to Dad's house," I said. "There's something in his study that could change everything, but I need to get there before Alex finds it." "What exactly are we looking for?" Howard asked, his lawyer's mind already working on the problem. Safe behind the vintage map in his study. Dad showed it to me 3 months ago. He kept important documents there, documents not even his regular lawyer knew about. "I'll be at the hospital in an hour," Howard said decisively. "And I'll arrange for a private nurse to meet us at James's house. You'll stay there during your recovery." True to his word, Howard arrived with discharge papers in hand and a wheelchair waiting. Dr. Sharma gave me a final examination, a prescription for pain medication, and stern instructions for my continued care. By afternoon, I was being carefully helped into Howard's Mercedes. Every bump in the road sent jolts of pain through my still-healing body, but I gritted my teeth and focused on what needed to be done. The familiar drive to my father's Bellevue estate took us past the gleaming Lake Washington, the water reflecting the cloudy sky above. "I've been keeping tabs on Meridian since James passed," Howard said as we drove. "Alex has been meeting with the board members individually, whining and dining them. And there was a filing with the SEC yesterday about a potential acquisition." My stomach tightened. "Vertex Capital?" Howard nodded grimly. "The groundwork is being laid. If Alex has indeed produced a new will giving him controlling interest, and if the board backs him," he didn't need to finish the thought. "Meridian would be sold, stripped for parts, and Dad's legacy would vanish." The company that had developed water purification systems for disaster-stricken areas created sustainable engineering solutions for developing communities and always prioritized ethical impact alongside profit margins would be reduced to patents and client lists. Dad's house appeared ahead, a modern cedar and glass structure set back from the road. As we pulled into the circular driveway, I noticed Alex's sleek black Audi parked near the entrance. "He's here," I whispered, panic rising in my chest. "Howard, we can't let him see me." Howard's expression hardened. "Leave that to me." He pulled past the main entrance to the service entrance at the side of the house, then helped me from the car. My legs were weak after weeks in a hospital bed, and I leaned heavily on Howard as we made our way inside. Martha, Dad's housekeeper for over a decade, met us at the door, her eyes widening at my condition. "Miss Ellie, they didn't tell me you were being discharged today." She looked nervously toward the front of the house. "Mr. Alex is in your father's study." "We need to avoid him," I whispered. "Is the guest room on this floor ready?" Martha nodded. "Always kept ready, just as your father liked." Howard helped me to the guest bedroom while Martha kept watch for Alex. Once I was settled, Howard conferred quietly with Martha before returning to my side. "Alex seems to be going through your father's files," he reported. "Martha says he's been doing this every evening for the past week, staying late into the night." I closed my eyes, trying to think through the fog of pain medication. "We need to get him out of the house long enough for me to access the safe." As if in answer to my thoughts, my phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Emergency at Meridian. Water pipe burst near the server room. IT director requesting Alex's presence. ASAP." I showed Howard the message, a small smile forming despite the pain. Claire came through. Howard immediately went to relay the information to Martha, who would casually mention it to Alex. Within minutes, we heard the front door slam and the sound of Alex's car speeding down the driveway. "We don't have much time," I said, attempting to push myself up from the bed. The pain made me gasp, black spots dancing in my vision. Howard gently pressed me back down. "Tell me where to look. I'll do the physical part." I described the exact location of the safe, behind the large vintage map of the Pacific Northwest that Dad had bought at an auction when I was just a child. "The combination is my birthday, Mom's birthday, and the year Meridian was founded. 10/22/07/15/1992. Howard left while Martha stayed with me, her kind face etched with concern. "Your father would be heartbroken to see what's happening," she said quietly. "Mr. Alex, he's changed since your father passed. Emptied your father's liquor cabinet the night of the funeral. I found him in the study the next morning, surrounded by papers, looking, I don't know, triumphant." Her words confirmed what I already suspected. Alex had been planning this takeover for some time, perhaps even before Dad's death. The thought made me sick. Howard returned 15 minutes later carrying a leather portfolio. His expression was grim but determined. "Found it," he said, placing the portfolio beside me on the bed. "But I also found something else. The study has been thoroughly searched, drawers left partially open, books out of place. Alex has been looking for something." "This," I said, touching the portfolio. "He's been looking for this." With trembling hands, I undid the leather ties. Inside were exactly what I'd hoped to find: Dad's real succession plans, notarized and dated just 3 weeks before his death. The documents clearly stated that Meridian Innovations would be jointly controlled by Alex and me, with a supermajority vote of 65% required for any major company decisions, including sale of assets or changes to the executive structure. Most critically, there was a letter addressed to me, sealed and dated the day before my accident. "My dear Ellie, if you're reading this, circumstances have forced your hand. I've been concerned about Alex's recent meetings with Vertex Capital. Meetings he thought I didn't know about. I fear he's forgotten what Meridian truly stands for. The enclosed documents represent my true wishes for the company's future. The succession plan ensures neither you nor Alex can make unilateral decisions. This was deliberate. You balance each other when at your best. But I've also included something Alex doesn't know exists: my controlling interest in Riverstone Technologies, which holds the patents to our most valuable innovations. Without these, Meridian would be worth a fraction of its current value to any buyer. Use this leverage wisely, Ellie. Not to punish your brother, but to preserve what we've built and what it stands for." With love and faith in you, Dad, I looked up at Howard, tears blurring my vision. He knew. Dad knew what Alex might try to do. Howard nodded solemnly. "James always saw people clearly, even those he loved." He gestured to the documents. "This changes everything, but we need to move carefully. If Alex has indeed produced a fraudulent will, we're dealing with criminal activity." Just then, Martha appeared at the doorway, her face pale. "Mr. Alex just called. He says there was no emergency at Meridian. He's on his way back, and he sounds angry." Howard quickly gathered the documents back into the portfolio. "We need to leave. Now." "No," I said firmly, finding strength in my father's words. "This is Dad's house, our house. I'm not running from Alex. It's time he learned that his plan has a fatal flaw." Howard looked uncertain. "Ellie, you're in no condition for a confrontation." "I don't need physical strength for this," I replied, clutching the portfolio to my chest. "I have something much more powerful: the truth." As we heard Alex's car pulling into the driveway, I steeled myself for the confrontation ahead. The documents in my possession would shatter his carefully constructed plans, but I knew my brother well enough to understand he wouldn't give up without a fight. What Alex didn't realize was that neither would I. The front door slammed with enough force to rattle the windows. Alex's footsteps echoed through the house, heavy, determined, angry. "Martha!" His voice carried down the hallway. "Who's here? Whose car is that?" Howard squeezed my hand reassuringly before standing to position himself between the door and my bed. Martha had quietly slipped out, presumably to intercept Alex, but I could hear his footsteps approaching regardless. "Sir, please." Martha's protest was cut short as Alex pushed past her into the doorway of the guest room. He froze at the sight of me propped up against the pillows, Howard standing protectively nearby. For a brief moment, I caught a flicker of something in his eyes, shock, perhaps even guilt, before his expression hardened into cool detachment. "Well," he said, straightening his designer tie, "this is unexpected. I wasn't informed you were being discharged today." "Clearly," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Though as co-owner of Meridian Innovations, I'm not sure why I would need your permission to recover in my father's home." Alex's eyes narrowed at my deliberate emphasis on co-owner. His gaze flicked to the portfolio resting on my lap, and I saw the exact moment recognition dawned on his face. "Howard," he acknowledged coldly, "I see you've taken it upon yourself to interfere in family matters. Family matters became legal matters when you started falsifying documents, Alex," Howard replied, his voice carrying the weight of his 40 years in corporate law. Alex's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "That's a serious accusation. I'd be careful making statements like that without evidence." I opened the portfolio and removed Dad's letter, holding it up. "We have the evidence. Dad's real succession plan, his letter explaining his concerns about your meetings with Vertex Capital and—" I paused for effect. "Documentation of his controlling interest in Riverstone Technologies." The color drained from Alex's face at the mention of Riverstone. He clearly hadn't known about this particular contingency of Dad's. "That's impossible," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Dad signed a new will before he died. Everything was handled legally." "By Victor Prentice?" I asked. "Your college roommate who was disbarred in Oregon before conveniently getting licensed in Washington? That Victor?" A muscle twitches in Alex's jaw. "You've been in a hospital bed for weeks. You have no idea what's been happening at Meridian. The company is in financial trouble. Dad was sentimental about his legacy, but his business model isn't sustainable in today's market." "That's not true," I countered. "I reviewed the quarterly projections with Dad the day before my accident. Meridian is financially sound, especially with the new water filtration contracts coming in. Those contracts are a dream." Alex's composure cracked slightly. "Developing nations with unstable governments? Relief organizations with limited budgets? Where's the reliable profit in that?" And there it was, the fundamental difference between us. Dad and I had built Meridian to make a difference first and a profit second. Alex had never understood that vision. "Those contracts represent exactly what Meridian stands for," I said quietly. "Innovation that matters. Engineering that changes lives." Alex rolled his eyes. "Save the company motto for the website, Ellie. The real world runs on profit margins and growth projections. Vertex understands that. They're offering 3 times Meridian's market value. And what happens to our employees, our projects in development, the communities that depend on our technology?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "That's business," he replied coldly. "Acquisitions mean restructuring. It's inevitable." Howard stepped forward. "Let's be clear about what's happening here. Alex, you've produced a fraudulent will, attempted to exclude Ellie from her rightful position in the company, and begun negotiations to sell Meridian against your father's explicit wishes." Alex's face flushed with anger. "You can't prove any of that." "Actually," Howard continued, "we can. The document forensics on your new will should be interesting, especially when compared to these notarized papers, not to mention the testimony from the board members you've been pressuring individually." I could almost see the calculations happening behind Alex's eyes as he assessed his position. His gaze kept returning to the portfolio in my lap, as if he could somehow seize it and make all his problems disappear. "This company is being run into the ground by Dad's outdated idealism," he said finally. "You were always his favorite, Ellie. Always the one who shared his vision, who could do no wrong. He never saw what I could bring to Meridian. Financial acumen, strategic partnerships, global positioning. He saw exactly who you are," I said sadly. That's why he created a succession plan that required us to work together. He knew I needed your financial expertise, just as you needed my innovation focus. He wanted us to balance each other. Balance? Alex scoffed. When has anything been balanced between us? You got the title you wanted, the projects you wanted. Dad's approval. What did I get? CFO, glorified accountant, always in the shadows. The bitterness in his voice was raw, revealing wounds I hadn't fully appreciated. For all his outward confidence, Alex had always measured himself against Dad's standards and found himself wanting. That's not true, I said more gently. Dad valued you. He just wanted Meridian to maintain its ethical foundation while growing financially. Ethics don't pay dividends, Alex muttered. But they do create a legacy worth preserving, I countered. And they're what make Meridian valuable beyond just its patents and client list. An uncomfortable silence fell between us. Martha had quietly retreated, closing the door behind her to give us privacy. Howard remained standing, a silent but watchful presence. Finally, Alex spoke, his voice carefully controlled once more. So, what happens now? You wave those papers around, declare victory, and take control of Meridian? No, I said firmly. What happens now is we honor Dad's wishes. Joint leadership, supermajority voting on major decisions, no sale to Vertex or anyone else without mutual agreement. Alex's laugh was hollow. You think we can work together after this? That we can just pretend the last few weeks never happened? I'm not suggesting we pretend anything, I replied. I'm suggesting we try to salvage what matters. Dad's legacy, Meridian's mission, and maybe even our relationship as siblings. He turned away, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, in a rare gesture of frustration. The board meeting is scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m. The vote on Vertex's offer is the primary agenda item. I've spent weeks securing their support. Then I'll be there, I said, setting the portfolio aside and attempting to sit up straighter, wincing at the pain the movement caused. Alex turned back, his eyes taking in my condition. The pallor of my skin, the evident weakness in my movements. You can barely sit up without pain. You think you can walk into a boardroom and take control? If necessary, yes. Howard cleared his throat. Perhaps there's a more productive approach. Alex, you've clearly put significant work into the Vertex negotiations. That demonstrates your value to Meridian, even if the direction is misguided. Alex raised an eyebrow, suspicious but listening. The board doesn't need to know about any of this unpleasantness, Howard continued. Ellie attends tomorrow's meeting as planned in the original succession documents. You jointly present a new direction for Meridian, one that addresses your financial concerns while preserving the company's core mission. And the Vertex offer? Alex asked. It has declined, I said firmly. But we can explore strategic partnerships that don't involve selling the company outright. Alex paced the room, considering. I could see the conflict playing across his face, the pride that wanted to reject any compromise, battling with the pragmatism that recognized his position had been severely weakened. I'd still be CFO, he said finally. Still taking orders. From you. Not orders. We'd be equals, Alex. True co-leaders. Just as Dad intended. Your financial expertise is essential to Meridian's future. I've never disputed that. He stopped pacing, regarding me with a guarded expression. And if I refuse this generous offer? If I take my chances with the board anyway? Howard stepped forward, his voice firm but not threatening. Then we present the evidence of document fraud to the board, along with these legitimate succession papers. Best case scenario for you. Extreme embarrassment and removal from the company. Worst case, criminal charges. The weight of his precarious position seemed to finally hit Alex. He sank into the armchair near the window, suddenly looking exhausted, rather than angry. He never told me about Riverstone, he said quietly, almost to himself. All those years working as CFO, and he kept an entire holding company secret from me. He was protecting Meridian's most valuable assets, I explained. Not just from outside threats, but from internal ones, too. Dad always played the long game, Alex. A hint of grudging respect flickered across Alex's face. The old man was craftier than I gave him credit for. For the first time since entering the room, Alex truly looked at me, not as an opponent to be outmaneuvered, but as his sister. His expression softened slightly as he took in the visible evidence of my injuries, the way I leaned against the pillows for support. "You really should be in the hospital," he said, his tone almost concerned. "Probably," I admitted. "But some things are more important than comfort." Another silence fell between us, less hostile than before. The confrontation had reached its inflection point. What remained was to see which direction we would go from here. Alex stood abruptly. "I need to think. The board meeting is at 2 p.m. tomorrow. I'll see you there. Or not." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Those documents don't leave this house. They're copies," Howard said smoothly. "The originals are already with my firm's secure document service." Alex's mouth tightened, but he nodded once before walking out. His footsteps echoed down the hallway, followed by the sound of the front door closing, notably gentler than when he'd arrived. Howard let out a long breath. Well, that went better than expected. No one threw anything. I managed a weak smile, suddenly exhausted as the adrenaline of the confrontation ebbed. He's going to try something. He hasn't given up. "No," Howard agreed, "but he's calculating his odds now, and they don't look good." I sank back against the pillows, my body reminding me forcefully that I was far from recovered. "We need to contact the board members individually before tomorrow, and I need to review the Vertex offer so I know exactly what we're rejecting." Howard gently took the portfolio from the bed. "First, you need to rest. Doctor's orders. I'll handle the board calls and get the Vertex documents. We'll review everything in the morning when you've had some sleep." As Howard left to make arrangements, I gazed out the window at the darkening sky. The confrontation with Alex had gone as well as could be expected, but something told me this was just the beginning. The board meeting tomorrow would be the real test, not just of who would control Meridian, but of what kind of company it would be going forward. And despite my confident words to Alex, I wasn't sure I had the physical strength to face what was coming. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would find a way. For Dad, for Meridian, and for myself. Sleep came in fitful bursts that night, interrupted by pain and anxious thoughts about the board meeting. By dawn, I was already awake, reviewing. The documents Howard had left beside my bed, copies of the Vertex acquisition offer, Meridian's most recent financial statements, and profiles of each board member. Martha appeared with a breakfast tray and my pain medication. "You should be resting, Miss Ellie, not working." "The board meeting is in 8 hours, I replied, gratefully accepting the coffee she offered. "Rest will have to wait." She clicked her tongue disapprovingly but helped prop me up with extra pillows. "Your father would be proud of you fighting for the company like this, but he'd also tell you to take care of yourself." She was right, of course. Dad had always emphasized sustainable effort. "You can't help others if you burn yourself out," he'd say. But these were extraordinary circumstances. A soft knock at the door announced Howard's arrival. He entered carrying a garment bag over one arm and a concerned expression. "Did you sleep at all?" he asked, taking in the papers spread across my bed. "Enough," I lied. "Did you reach the board members?" Howard hung the garment bag on the door. 4 of the 7, Jenkins and Washington, were supportive once I explained the situation. Lowell was non-committal, but concerned about the ethics of what Alex has been doing. Peterson refused to discuss anything before the meeting. And the other 3? Unreachable. Which probably means Alex got to them first. Howard sat in the chair, beside my bed. "But that still leaves the vote uncertain. With you there presenting the legitimate succession plan, we have a fighting chance." I nodded. though the thought of physically attending the meeting was daunting. Every movement sent pain radiating through my still healing body, and the mere act of sitting up for an hour left me exhausted. I had Claire bring one of your business suits, Howard continued, gesturing to the garment bag, and the private nurse will be here at noon to help you prepare. But Ellie, I need to be clear about something. This is going to push your recovery back significantly. Dr. Sharma would strongly advise against it. I know, I said softly. But there's no other option. This meeting will determine Meridian's future. I have to be there. Howard nodded, resigned. Then let's use our time wisely. I've been going through the Vertex offer. There are some concerning clauses you should be aware of. We spent the next several hours dissecting the acquisition proposal. As suspected, the deal would effectively dismantle Meridian as we knew it. The research division would be absorbed into Vertex's existing structure, the sustainable projects terminated, and over 60% of staff evaluated for retention, corporate speak for mass layoffs. They're only interested in the patents and client relationships, I said, disgusted. Everything Dad built would be gone within 6 months. Howard nodded grimly. Classic corporate acquisition strategy. Strip the assets, eliminate the competition, and discard the rest. And the board is considering this? Alex has presented it as the only viable option for Meridian's future. According to what Jenkins told me, he's been painting a bleak financial picture. I shuffled through the financial statements, my engineering mind quickly processing the numbers. But that's not accurate. Yes, the sustainable projects have higher initial costs, but the long-term contracts are solid. And the new filtration system has already secured pre-orders from 3 major relief organizations. Alex has apparently been emphasizing short-term financials and downplaying future projections, Howard explained. Selective presentation of data. My phone buzzed with a text from Claire. Just left Meridian. Alex called an emergency pre-meeting with board members at noon. Something's happening. I showed Howard the message, the alarm rising. He's making a move before I can get there. Howard's expression darkened. We need to act now. I'll call the board secretary and invoke emergency shareholder rights to postpone any vote until all legal successors are present. While Howard made his calls, I dialed Marco Rodriguez, our head of engineering and Dad's trusted project manager for 15 years. Ellie? Marco answered, surprise evident in his voice. Are you out of the hospital? Yes, and I need your help, Marco. Alex has called an early board meeting to push through the Vertex sale before I can get there. I know, Marco said grimly. He's been in meetings all morning, brought in financial consultants to present objective analysis of Meridian's position. It doesn't look good. Those consultants work for Vertex, I said. This isn't an objective analysis. It's a coordinated takeover. Marco lowered his voice. Half the engineering department is ready to walk if the sale goes through. We know what Vertex does to acquired companies, but the board seems convinced it's the only option. An idea began forming. Risky, but potentially game-changing. Marco, do you still have access to the prototype of the new filtration system? Of course. It's in the secure lab. Why? I need you to prepare a demonstration for the board meeting. The full system, not just the presentation slides Alex has been using. That's ambitious, Marco said carefully. The prototype is functional but not polished for public viewing. It doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to be real. Can you have it ready by 2 p.m.? I could almost hear Marco's mind working through the logistics. It'll be tight, but yes, we can make it happen. Good. And one more thing. Can you gather performance data from our previous sustainable projects? Real-world impact metrics, not just financial returns? Absolutely. The team has been documenting everything. Marco paused. Are you really coming to the meeting? Last I heard, you were still in critical condition. I'll be there, I promised, though my body protested even at the thought. Meridian is worth fighting for. After ending the call with Marco, I reached out to Sanjay Patel, our chief marketing officer. While he couldn't block the board meeting, he could help prepare a counter-narrative to Vertex's acquisition proposal. "Ellie, thank God," Sanjay said when he answered. "Things are falling apart here. Alex has the board convinced we're 1/4 away from financial ruin." "We're not," I assured him. "But I need your help to make that clear. Can you put together a presentation on our market position? Focus on the long-term contracts, the industry recognition, and especially the impact of our sustainable technology programs." "Consider it done. But will they even let you present? Alex has the agenda locked down tight." "Leave that to me and Howard," I said with more confidence than I felt. "Just have the materials ready. And Sanjay, thank you for standing by Meridian's mission." "Your father gave me my start when no one else would take a chance on me," he replied simply. "I won't let his company be dismantled without a fight." By noon, the private nurse Howard had arranged arrived, a no-nonsense woman named Diane, who immediately assessed my condition with professional efficiency. "You should be in bed for at least another week," she declared after checking my vital signs. "But since that's apparently not happening, let's minimize the damage." With Diane's help, I managed a short shower, my first since leaving the hospital, and changed into the business suit Claire had sent over. The simple act of dressing drained what little energy I had, but I refused to show weakness. Too much depended on my presence at that meeting. Howard returned from his calls looking both concerned and determined. "Alex is moving faster than anticipated. He's secured proxies from the 2 board members we couldn't reach, and he's brought in Victor Prentice to present the legal documentation of his authority." "Can he do that? Use proxies for this kind of vote?" "Technically, yes, if he convinced them to sign over their voting rights. But it won't matter once we present the real succession documents." Howard checked his watch. "The car will be here in 30 minutes. Are you certain you're up for this?" I was far from certain, but nodded. "Anyway, what's our strategy?" "Direct confrontation," Howard said firmly. "We enter. I invoke shareholder rights to address the board. You present the legitimate succession documentation, and we call for an immediate halt to any acquisition discussions pending legal review." As we prepared to leave, Martha appeared, with a small leather case. "Your father wanted you to have this," she said, placing it in my hands. "He told me to give it to you when the time was right. I think this qualifies." Inside the case was Dad's treasured fountain pen, the one he'd used to sign every major contract since founding Meridian. Attached was a small note in his handwriting. "For Ellie, to write Meridian's next chapter." Tears pricked my eyes as I closed my fingers around the pen. It was as if Dad was still here, supporting me in the fight ahead. The journey to Meridian's headquarters was painful, despite the cushioned seats of Howard's luxury car. Each turn and stop sent waves of discomfort through my body. Diane monitored me closely, adjusting my position and offering pain medication that I reluctantly accepted. I needed to be clear-headed for the meeting, but I also needed to be functional. As we pulled up to the familiar glass and steel building that housed Meridian Innovations, I felt a surge of determination. This was where Dad had built his dream. This was where we'd worked side by side developing technologies that helped people while maintaining a profitable business. I wouldn't let it be reduced to line items in Vertex's portfolio. Claire was waiting at the private entrance, her usually composed face tight with worry. "You made it," she said, relief evident in her voice. "Alex has the board assembled in the main conference room. They've been in there for over an hour." "Has the vote happened yet?" I asked as Howard helped me from the car. "Not yet, but they're close. Alex has been methodically addressing every potential concern about the acquisition. He's very prepared." Of course he was. My brother had always been thorough when pursuing something he wanted, and he'd had weeks to craft his arguments. While I was incapacitated, "So are we," I assured her, gripping Dad's pen tightly in my hand. Is Marco ready with the prototype? Claire nodded. It's set up in the adjacent conference room. Sanjay has the market analysis presentation loaded and ready to go. But Ellie... She hesitated. Alex has security posted at the conference room doors. He's given instructions that the meeting is not to be disturbed. I exchanged glances with Howard. Another obstacle, but not insurmountable. He can't legally bar a company owner from a board meeting, Howard stated firmly. And if he tries, that only strengthens our case against him. As we made our way through the building, familiar faces registered shock at my appearance, both at seeing me out of the hospital and, I suspected, at my noticeably weakened state. I forced myself to stand as straight as possible, to walk without Howard's support, despite the pain it caused. Perception would be crucial in the next hour. We reached the executive floor to find 2 security guards positioned outside the main conference room doors. They looked uncomfortable as we approached. These were Meridian employees who knew me well, now placed in an awkward position. Ms. Mercer, one of them began. Mr. Mercer has requested that the meeting not be interrupted. I understand, Paul, I said calmly. But as co-owner of Meridian Innovations, I'm not interrupting. I'm attending. The guards exchanged uncertain glances. Howard stepped forward, his authoritative presence impossible to ignore. Gentlemen, preventing Ms. Mercer from attending this board meeting would constitute a serious legal violation. I suggest you make the wise choice here. After a moment's hesitation, Paul nodded and stepped aside. Yes, ma'am, sir. With a deep breath to steady myself, I grasped the door handle. Behind this door, my brother was selling our father's legacy to the highest bidder. Behind this door, Meridian's future hung in the balance. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The conversation in the boardroom died instantly as all heads turned toward the door. 8 faces registered various degrees of shock at my appearance. 7 board members seated around the massive walnut table, and Alex, standing at the head with a presentation remote in his hand. For a brief moment, no one spoke. The projected slide behind Alex showed a graph with Meridian's stock value steadily declining, a selective representation of data that ignored our strong fundamentals. Alex recovered first, his surprise quickly masked by a professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ellie, this is unexpected. We were told you were still confined to hospital care. Clearly, those reports were exaggerated, I replied, my voice steadier than my legs felt as I made my way into the room. Howard followed close behind, a reassuring presence at my shoulder. Dr. Abigail Jenkins, one of our longest-serving board members and a former colleague of Dad's, stood immediately. Ellie, my dear, should you be up and about? You look like I've been hit by a car, I finished with a small smile. That's because I was. But some things are important enough to leave a hospital bed for. The future of Meridian is one of them. Board Chairman William Lowell cleared his throat. While we're certainly pleased to see you recovering, Ms. Mercer, we are in the middle of a critical vote regarding the company's future. Perhaps if you'd like to observe— I'm not here to observe, Mr. Lowell, I interrupted, moving slowly toward the table. Each step required conscious effort not to wince. I'm here to participate. As the rightful co-CEO of Meridian Innovations, according to my father's legal succession plan. Alex's smile faltered. We've already addressed the succession matter. The board has reviewed the updated will and has been misled, Howard interjected, smoothly, stepping forward to place a folder on the table. My name is Howard Bennett, corporate attorney and executor of James Mercer's estate. The documents you've been presented with are, to put it delicately, problematic. Alex's face hardened. This is highly inappropriate. Mr. Bennett has no standing in this meeting, and these interruptions are preventing the board from conducting its legitimate business. On the contrary, Howard replied, as the legal representative of a principal shareholder, I have every right to address concerns about potentially fraudulent documents being used to facilitate a company sale. The word fraudulent sent a ripple of unease through the room. Board members exchanged glances, suddenly less certain about the proceedings. "These are serious allegations," Chairman Lowell said, frowning deeply. "Mr. Mercer has provided documentation signed by James Mercer giving him controlling interest in the company." "May I see this documentation?" I asked, reaching for Dad's succession papers in Howard's folder. Alex stepped forward quickly. "We don't have time for this. Vertex's offer expires at the end of business today. They've been more than generous, but they've made it clear this is their final proposal." "How convenient," I remarked. "An artificial deadline to force a hasty decision." I pulled out the notarized succession documents and slid them toward Chairman Lowell. "These are my father's actual wishes for Meridian's future, signed and notarized 3 weeks before his death. You'll note they specifically established joint leadership between Alex and myself, with a supermajority requirement for any major company decisions, including acquisition offers." Lowell studied the documents with a deepening frown, while the other board members leaned forward, tension filling the room. "This is a last-minute attempt to derail a beneficial transaction," Alex insisted, his composure slipping. "Ellie has been out of touch with company operations for weeks. She doesn't understand our current position." I steadied myself against the table, fighting a wave of dizziness. "Then enlighten me, Alex. Explain why Meridian, a profitable company with groundbreaking technology, loyal clients, and a 30-year reputation for excellence, suddenly needs to sell itself to a competitor known for dismantling the companies it acquires." "The market is changing," Alex replied, gesturing toward his presentation. "Our focus on sustainable long-term projects is draining capital. Vertex is offering 3 times our current market valuation, a tremendous return for our shareholders." "At the cost of everything Dad built," I countered. "Everything Meridian stands for." "Business isn't about sentimentality, Ellie." Alex's tone was patronizing. "It's about creating value. And what value will remain after Vertex absorbs our patents, lays off our staff, and abandons the projects that actually help people?" I turned to address the board directly. "You're being shown a deliberately pessimistic view of Meridian's position to justify a fire sale. But there's another perspective you should consider before voting." I nodded to Howard, who opened the conference room door. Marco entered, followed by 2 engineers wheeling in the prototype water filtration system we'd been developing for disaster relief zones. "What is this?" Alex demanded, his face flushing with anger. "This," I said, "is Meridian's future. The Meridian Pure S200, a portable, solar-powered filtration system capable of providing clean water for up to 500 people per day, at 1/10 the cost of current alternatives." Marco stepped forward, his pride in the project evident. "The S200 represents a breakthrough in both efficiency and affordability. We've already secured conditional contracts with 3 major international relief organizations, pending final production. Contracts that would be terminated if Meridian is acquired," I added, watching the board members' reactions. Sanjay entered next, quickly connecting his laptop to the projection system. The graph of Meridian's supposedly declining value was replaced by a comprehensive market analysis showing our actual position, solid fundamentals, growing market share in sustainable technology, and projected revenue increases from the new product lines. "This is the actual state of Meridian Innovations," Sanjay explained, his marketing expertise evident in the clear, compelling presentation. "Yes, our profit margins are slightly lower than industry averages in the short term. That's because we invest in technologies that solve real problems, not just quick profit ventures." Alex moved to interrupt, but Chairman Lowell held up his hand. "Let them finish, Alex. The board deserves to hear all perspectives before voting." For the next 20 minutes, Marco and Sanjay presented the complete picture of Meridian's operations, technological advantages, and market position. I watched the board members' expressions shift from concern to interest to cautious optimism. Dr. Jenkins spoke up first after the presentation. This filtration system, is it fully functional? Not. Just a concept? Completely operational, Marco confirmed. We've been field testing prototypes in partnership with Global Aid for 6 months. The results exceed all expectations. And the production costs? Asked Rajiv Washington, our most financially conservative board member. Higher initially than we'd like, Marco acknowledged, but we've identified manufacturing efficiencies that will reduce costs by approximately 22% in the second production run. The projection models are in your packets. Throughout the discussion, I remained standing despite the pain radiating through my body. To sit would show weakness, and I needed the board to see me as capable of leading Meridian forward. But my strength was fading fast, a fact that didn't escape Alex's notice. This is all very inspiring, he said, reclaiming control of the conversation as Sanjay finished. But it doesn't change the fundamental realities. Developing markets are unstable. Relief organizations have limited budgets. The commercial applications of our technology are where the real value lies. Value that Vertex is prepared to pay a premium for, at the cost of abandoning the projects that actually help people, I repeated. Business isn't charity, Ellie. No, I agreed. But it doesn't have to be predatory either. Dad built Meridian to prove that profit and purpose could coexist. That engineering excellence could serve humanity while also generating returns for investors. I turned to address the board again, summoning my remaining strength. The choice before you isn't just about finances. It's about what kind of company Meridian will be going forward. Will we honor my father's vision of innovation that matters? Or will we become just another cautionary tale of corporate acquisition and asset stripping? The room fell silent as the board members considered my words. I could see them weighing the options, the genuine uncertainty in their expressions. The vote could still go either way. Chairman Lowell finally spoke, his voice measured. These are compelling arguments on both sides, but before we proceed to a vote, we need to address the conflicting succession documents. If Ms. Mercer's papers are legitimate, then she has equal standing with Mr. Mercer in this decision. Alex's jaw tightened. Those documents were superseded by the will father signed before his death. The will that gives me controlling interest. A will witnessed by your friend Victor Prentice, I pointed out. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? Dad changes his carefully constructed succession plan just days before his death, with no mention to anyone else? He mentioned it to me, Alex insisted. And yet, Howard interjected, the signature on that will show distinct inconsistencies. With James Mercer's known signature, our forensic document expert would be happy to provide a detailed analysis. This is ridiculous, Alex snapped, losing his composure entirely. We don't have time for forensic analyses and legal wrangling. Vertex wants an answer today. Then the answer is no, I said firmly. At least until proper legal review of the succession documents is complete. Chairman Lowell nodded slowly. I believe that's the prudent course of action. This board cannot in good conscience approve an acquisition when the very authority to propose it is in question. Alex stared at Lowell in disbelief. You can't be serious. This opportunity won't come again. Vertex has made that clear. If their interest is genuine, they can wait for proper due diligence, Dr. Jenkins stated firmly. I, for one, am not comfortable proceeding under these circumstances. One by one, the other board members voiced similar concerns. The momentum had shifted and Alex knew it. I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes, the desperate search for a strategy to salvage his plans. This is a mistake, he said finally, gathering his papers. A massive, costly mistake that Meridian will regret for years to come. Perhaps, Chairman Lowell replied, but it's our mistake to make, after proper consideration of all factors, legal, financial, and ethical. Lowell turned to me, his expression softening slightly. Ms. Mercer, you've made a compelling case today, particularly under difficult circumstances. but you look like you need medical attention. May I suggest we adjourn this meeting and reconvene once the succession matter is clarified? I nodded, relief washing over me as the tension of the past hour caught up with my body. Thank you, Mr. Lowell. I believe that would be wise. As the board members gathered their materials and began to file out, Alex remained at the table, his expression unreadable. When only the two of us remained, he finally spoke. This isn't over, Ellie. You've won a delay, nothing more. I leaned heavily on the table, no longer bothering to hide my exhaustion. It doesn't have to be a battle, Alex. Dad wanted us to lead together, to balance each other's strengths and weaknesses. Always Dad's vision, Dad's way, Dad's perfect plan. The bitterness in his voice was palpable. Did it ever occur to you that his way might not be the only way? That Meridian could be something different, something bigger than what he imagined? Different doesn't have to mean abandoned principles, I replied quietly. Innovation doesn't have to come at the expense of ethics. Alex gathered his remaining papers without responding. At the door, he paused. You should go back to the hospital. You look terrible. It wasn't concern in his voice, more like a tactical assessment. But as he left the room, I caught a flicker of something in his expression that might have been respect, however grudging. The moment he was gone, my legs finally gave out. I sank into the nearest chair, the pain I'd been suppressing washing over me in waves. Howard rushed to my side, his face creased with worry. You need to get back to the doctor now, he said firmly. You've pushed yourself far too hard. I didn't argue. The immediate crisis had been averted, the vote delayed, the board alerted to the succession dispute, Alex's plans temporarily derailed. But as Howard helped me to my feet, I knew this was just the beginning of a longer struggle. The battle for Meridian's soul was far from over. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of medical evaluations, pain medication, and fitful sleep. Dr. Sharma was not pleased when I was readmitted to the hospital, her expression a mixture of professional concern and personal disappointment as she reviewed my deteriorated condition. You've set your recovery back by at least 2 weeks, she admonished, checking the fresh inflammation around my healing ribs. Whatever you did must have been important. It was, I assured her, wincing as she gently probed my side. Worth every moment of pain. She sighed, making notes in my chart. Your body might disagree. You need complete rest now. No work calls, no visitors except immediate family, no stress. That last requirement seemed impossible under the circumstances, but I nodded anyway. The board meeting had drained what little energy I'd managed to rebuild, and my body was demanding the rest I'd denied it. Howard visited briefly that evening, keeping his update succinct out of respect for Dr. Sharma's orders. The board has postponed any vote on the Vertex acquisition until the succession dispute is resolved. They've requested formal legal review of both documents, with results expected within 10 days. And Alex? I asked, fighting to keep my eyes open as the medication took effect. Maintaining his position but proceeding cautiously. The board's hesitation has made him more strategic, less impulsive. Howard squeezed my hand gently. Rest now. I've got people watching everything at Meridian. I drifted into sleep, wondering what Alex's next move would be. My brother had never been one to accept defeat gracefully, and I doubted he would start now. When I woke the next morning, Claire was sitting beside my bed, her laptop open as she worked quietly. You're supposed to be at Meridian, I said. My voice rough from sleep. She looked up with a soft smile. I am at work. Just relocated my office temporarily. She gestured to her laptop. Someone needs to keep you updated without stressing you out. Howard thought I was the logical choice. Is there news? Claire hesitated just long enough for me to know something significant had happened. Alex called an all-staff meeting yesterday afternoon. I struggled to sit up straighter, concerned instantly overriding my fatigue. About what? Ostensibly to reassure everyone that Meridian remains stable despite the temporary leadership uncertainty, as he put it. Claire's air quotes made her opinion of that phrasing clear. But really, I think it was damage control. Word about the board meeting spread quickly. People know you challenged him and stopped the Vertex sale. How did the staff react? Mixed. Claire closed her laptop, giving me her full attention. Most of engineering and R&D are firmly in your corner. They've been worried about what Vertex would do to the innovative projects, especially the sustainable. Uns? And the rest? Finance and some of the sales are with Alex. They've bought into his vision of a more commercially focused Meridian, and others are just keeping their heads down, waiting to see who wins before committing. It was about what I'd expected. Meridian had always housed two somewhat distinct cultures, those drawn to the innovative, world-changing aspects of our work, and those more focused on traditional business metrics. There's something else, Claire continued, looking slightly uncomfortable. Kendra Mitchell from Vertex Capital requested a meeting with you. That was unexpected. Kendra Mitchell was Vertex's aggressive CEO, known for her ruthless acquisition strategies. What did you tell her? That you're unavailable due to medical recovery, but that I'd pass along the request. She was insistent. Said it was a private matter, not related to the acquisition. I frowned, trying to make sense of this development. What could Mitchell possibly want to discuss privately? A different angle on the acquisition? A threat? A bribe? Tell her I'll consider meeting when I'm released from the hospital, I decided. But make it clear the acquisition is still off the table. Claire nodded, making a note on her phone. Also, Howard asked me to give you this. She handed me a sealed envelope. The preliminary findings from the document expert. My heart raced as I opened it, scanning the formal report inside. The expert's conclusion was carefully worded but clear. Significant irregularities in the signature on the will Alex had presented, consistent with forgery rather than authentic variation. Not definitive proof yet, but strong evidence that supported our case? This should be enough to convince the board, I murmured, relief washing over me. Howard's presenting it at the emergency board meeting tomorrow, Claire confirmed. Tomorrow? That's sooner than expected. Claire nodded. Chairman Lowell called it after receiving similar findings from the board's own independent expert. Things are moving quickly, Ellie. Too quickly for me to participate while confined to a hospital bed. The frustration must have shown on my face, because Claire reached over to squeeze my hand. You've done your part. Let Howard and the others handle this phase. Your job now is to recover so you can lead Meridian once this is resolved. She was right, of course, but inaction had never come easily to me, especially with so much at stake. Still, even I had to acknowledge that my body needed time to heal, time I now had thanks to the delayed board vote. Claire stayed for another hour, updating me on smaller matters at Meridian, and carefully avoiding any topics that might elevate my stress levels. After she left, I drifted in and out of sleep, my thoughts fuzzy from medication and exhaustion. A light knock at my door roused me sometime later. The sky outside my window had darkened to early evening, visiting hours nearly over. I expected to see Howard or perhaps Dr. Sharma making a final check. Instead, Victor Prentice stood in the doorway. I instantly reached for the call button, but Victor raised his hands in a placating gesture. Please, just hear me out, he said, remaining near the door. 5 minutes, that's all I ask. Victor had been Alex's friend since college, a connection that had always struck me as odd given their different personalities. Where Alex was controlled and strategic, Victor was impulsive and opportunistic. His legal career had been checkered at best, marked by ethical complaints and a disbarment in Oregon that he'd managed to overcome through family connections. Why should I listen to anything you have to say? I asked coldly. You helped my brother forge our father's will. Victor winced, glancing nervously into the hallway before stepping further into the room. That's actually why I'm here. He lowered his voice. You're right. The will isn't legitimate. I stared at him, taken aback by the direct admission. Are you recording this conversation? Is this some kind of trick? No trick. Victor looked genuinely distressed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Look, I never meant for things to go this far. Alex said your father had verbally expressed his wishes to change the succession plan. He just needed documentation to make it official. And you believed that? My tone made it clear how implausible I found this excuse. Victor had the decency to look ashamed. I wanted to believe it. Alex can be persuasive when he wants something, and the compensation he offered was significant. He swallowed hard. But falsifying a will is serious, criminal. When I heard about the forensic examination, I realized I couldn't maintain the lie. I studied him carefully, trying to determine if this apparent attack of conscience was genuine. Why come to me, instead of the board? Or Howard? Because I think there's more going on than you realize. Victor lowered his voice further. After the board meeting was postponed, Alex had another meeting with Vertex. Not with their acquisition team, but with Kendra Mitchell directly. Very private, very off the record. That aligned with Claire's information about Mitchell wanting to meet with me. What was discussed? I don't know the details, but afterward, Alex started asking me about ways to access your father's personal records, specifically something called Riverstone Technologies. My breath caught. Riverstone was Dad's holding company for Meridians. Most valuable patents, the company mentioned in his letter to me. But how had Alex learned about it? What did you tell him? I asked, careful to keep my expression neutral. Nothing specific. I genuinely didn't know anything. But the way he was asking, it wasn't normal curiosity. He seemed desperate to find information about it. Victor shifted uncomfortably. Look, I know I've made mistakes, serious ones, but I'm trying to make things right. Alex is pursuing something beyond just controlling Meridian, and I'm worried about how far he'll go. I considered Victor's words carefully. If he was telling the truth, a significant if, then Alex was now targeting Riverstone Technologies, perhaps as an alternative route, to giving Vertex what they wanted: control of Meridian's most valuable intellectual property. Why should I trust you now? I asked bluntly. Victor reached into his jacket pocket and removed a folded document. Because I'm willing to put this in writing. My sworn statement acknowledging that I helped create a fraudulent will, including the specific instructions Alex gave me. He placed it on my bedside table. I'll face the consequences of my actions, but I won't let this destroy your father's legacy. It was a compelling gesture, assuming the statement was as comprehensive as he claimed. But something still didn't add up. Alex must know this would implicate you. Why risk coming here? A flash of anger crossed Victor's face. Because he's already thrown me under the bus, told the board's investigator that I must have misunderstood his instructions, that he never asked me to falsify anything. His bitter laugh held no humor. 15 years of friendship, and he discarded me the moment I became a liability. Now Victor's motivation made sense. This wasn't about conscience. It was about revenge for Alex's betrayal. Still, a vengeful witness could be just as useful as a repentant one, perhaps more so. I'll need to have Howard review your statement, I said, nodding toward the document. Of course. Victor moved toward the door, then paused. There's one more thing you should know. The board isn't just concerned about the succession issue anymore. There are questions about company finances, specifically project funds that were reallocated under Alex's direction after your father died. This was new information. What kind of reallocations? I don't know the details, but Chairman Lowell has requested a full financial audit going back 6 months. Victor's expression was grim. Whatever Alex is involved in, it goes deeper than just wanting to control Meridian. Be careful, Ellie. After he left, I stared at the statement he'd provided, my mind racing despite the fog of medication. If Victor was telling the truth about the will, about Alex's interest in Riverstone, about financial irregularities, then the situation was even more complex than I'd realized. I reached for my phone to call Howard, then hesitated. This information changed things, but acting impulsively could be dangerous. I needed to think strategically, to understand the larger picture before making my next move. For the first time since this ordeal began, I found myself wondering if Alex's actions were driven by something more than simple ambition and resentment. What if he was caught up in something larger, something that made controlling Meridian seem like his only option? As darkness fell outside my hospital window, I realized that saving Dad's company might require more than just proving the legitimacy of the succession plan. It might require understanding what had driven my brother to such desperate measures in the first place, and perhaps finding a way to save him too. The next morning brought a surprise visitor, Chairman William Lowell himself. Tall and distinguished with silver hair and the measured movements of a man accustomed to being listened to, Lowell had known my father for over 20 years. They hadn't always agreed on Meridian's direction, but there had been mutual respect between them. "You look better than you did at the board meeting," he observed, settling into the visitor's chair. "Though that's not saying much. Hospital beds have that effect," I replied, adjusting myself to a more upright position. "I appreciate you coming, Chairman." "William, please. I think we're past formalities at this point." He studied me thoughtfully. "I wanted to see you before today's emergency board session. Your lawyer, Bennett, has presented compelling evidence regarding the succession documents." "And?" I prompted when he didn't continue. "And it appears your brother may have misrepresented certain facts to the board." Lowell's diplomatic phrasing couldn't disguise the seriousness of his meaning. There will be consequences for that, of course, but my concern extends beyond the succession issue. I thought of Victor's warning about financial irregularities. "Is this about the audit you've requested?" Lowell raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "I knew about it." "Yes. Initial findings indicate unusual fund transfers between project accounts over the past 4 months, since your father's death. Amounts were moved from sustainable development projects to commercial research, then portions were diverted to external consultants we can't verify." "Alex is doing?" "The authorizations bear his signature, yes. But what troubles me is the pattern. These aren't simple embezzlement or even standard misappropriation. They're systematic redirections specifically targeting the projects your father valued most." I frowned, trying to make sense of this. "You think Alex was deliberately undermining Meridian's sustainable initiatives? Why? That just devalues the company." "Unless devaluing specific aspects of Meridian was the goal," Lowell suggested quietly. The implication hit me with unexpected force. "You think the Vertex acquisition was about more than just buying Meridian? That they specifically wanted our commercial technologies but not the sustainable projects?" Lowell nodded slowly. The offer details were telling. Vertex proposed premium valuation for Meridian's commercial technology division while classifying the sustainable projects as non-core assets to be evaluated post-acquisition. "Corporate speak for shut down immediately," I translated. "Precisely. And by systematically redirecting funds away from those projects, Alex was essentially preparing them for closure, making them appear less viable, less central to Meridian's operations." This aligned with what I'd seen in Alex's board presentation. The selective data showing Meridian's supposedly precarious position, the emphasis on short-term commercial returns over long-term sustainable growth. "But why?" I asked, more to myself than to Lowell. "Alex knows how important those projects were to Dad, to the company's mission." "That's what I came to discuss with you," Lowell said, leaning forward. "Your brother is an ambitious man, but this level of calculated dismantling suggests more Then simple disagreement over company direction. I believe he's under pressure. From Vertex? Perhaps. Or from somewhere else. Lowell hesitated. I'm not prone to speculation, but the board has concerns that extend beyond the succession dispute. If you're well enough, we'd like you to attend today's meeting, virtually, of course. The fact that the board chairman was personally inviting me to participate suggested the situation was even more serious than I'd realized. I'll be there, I promised. What time? 2:00. I'll have the details sent to you. Lowell stood to leave, then paused. One more thing. The name Riverstone Technologies appeared in some of the communications we reviewed. Does that mean anything to you? I kept my expression neutral despite my racing heart. My father mentioned it once or twice. A holding company for some of Meridian's patents, I believe. Lowell nodded, revealing nothing about whether he believed me. Well, I look forward to seeing you, virtually, at the meeting. After he left, I immediately called Howard, who arrived 30 minutes later looking both concerned and intrigued by what I relayed. This confirms what we suspected, he said, after I'd shared both Victor's visit and Lowell's information. Alex isn't just trying to take control of Meridian. He's preparing it for a very specific kind of acquisition. But why would he systematically undermine the company's most innovative projects? I asked, still troubled by this aspect. Even from a purely financial perspective, those sustainable technologies have tremendous long-term value. Howard considered this. Perhaps not to Vertex, or perhaps there's another player involved we haven't identified yet. Kendra Mitchell requested a meeting with me, I reminded him. Claire said she claimed it wasn't about the acquisition. I wouldn't trust Mitchell's word on anything, Howard said dismissively. Vertex has been trying to acquire Meridian's technology. For years. They'd say anything to make that happen. I wasn't so sure. The pieces weren't fitting together in a way that made complete sense. Alex's actions seemed too calculated, too specific to be explained by a simple power grab or even a lucrative acquisition deal. I need to attend that board meeting, I said firmly, and I need to see those financial reports for myself. Howard looked skeptical. Dr. Sharma was very clear about minimizing your stress. This is happening whether I participate or not. Better to be informed and prepared than blindsided. I fixed him with a determined stare. Set it up, Howard, and get me everything the board has on those financial irregularities. Reluctantly, he agreed, making arrangements for secure video conferencing equipment to be brought to my hospital room. By early afternoon, I was propped up in bed with a laptop, reviewing the financial data that had prompted the board's concerns. The patterns were indeed troubling. Since Dad's death, small but significant amounts had been systematically redirected from our sustainable technology projects to commercial research, with approximately 15% of those transferred funds then moving to external consulting companies. I didn't recognize Alpina Solutions, Tetra Dynamics, and Helix Consulting Group. I asked Claire to research these companies, and her findings were suspicious. All three had been established within the past year. All had minimal online presence, and none had verifiable track records in engineering or technology consulting. They appeared to be shell companies designed to receive funds without providing actual services. But why would Alex risk his reputation, risk criminal charges, to funnel relatively modest amounts to fake consulting firms? The total was significant but not life-changing for someone in Alex's position. Approximately $1.2 million over 4 months. Given the potential consequences, it seemed like an irrational risk, unless the money wasn't the primary objective. A new thought occurred to me as I reviewed the specific projects affected. Every single one involved technologies that Dad had been particularly passionate about: water purification, low-cost renewable energy for developing regions, sustainable building, materials for disaster-prone areas. The projects that most embodied Meridian's mission of engineering excellence with integrity. What if the goal wasn't the money itself, but the systematic undermining of those specific initiatives? making them appear less viable, less successful, less central to Meridian's operations, exactly as Lowell had suggested. But again, why? If Alex simply disagreed with the company's direction, there were legitimate ways to shift strategy as CFO without resorting to financial manipulation, unless someone else was calling the shots. I picked up my phone and made an unexpected call. Ms. Mercer? Kendra Mitchell's voice held surprise and perhaps a hint of satisfaction. I didn't expect to hear from you directly. I understand you wanted to meet, I said, dispensing with pleasantries. I'd like to know why. That's a conversation better had in person. Her tone was carefully neutral. Your assistant mentioned you're still recovering. Perhaps when you're discharged. How about now? I interrupted. I believe we have matters. To discuss that won't wait. A pause. Very well. I can be at Harborview Medical Center in 30 minutes. Shall I bring anything specific for this conversation? Just the truth about why you're really interested in Meridian. I ended the call before she could respond, then immediately called security to ensure only approved visitors would be allowed into my room. Howard would be furious that I'd arranged this meeting without consulting him, but instinct told me Kendra. Mitchell might be the key to understanding what was really happening. True to her word, Mitchell arrived exactly 30 minutes later. She was younger than I'd expected from her reputation, perhaps early 40s, with sharp features and the focused intensity of someone unaccustomed to wasting time. You look remarkably well for someone who stopped a board meeting through sheer force of will while recovering from major injuries, she observed, taking the visitor's chair without waiting for an invitation. Let's skip the pretense, I replied. Vertex has been pursuing Meridian's technology for years. You finally thought you had it through Alex, but I derailed the acquisition. Now I find evidence that my brother has been systematically undermining our sustainable technology initiatives, the exact projects your acquisition proposal classified as non-core assets. Mitchell smiled thinly. You've been busy for someone in a hospital bed. The question is why? Why is Vertex so interested in acquiring Meridian only to dismantle half of what makes it valuable? And why would my brother help you do it? Instead of answering directly, Mitchell opened her briefcase and removed a thin file folder. Are you familiar with Archer Global? The name was vaguely familiar. A multinational conglomerate with interests in energy, pharmaceuticals, and technology. I know they're one of the largest corporations in the world. What do they have to do with Meridian? Everything. Mitchell slid the folder toward me. Archer has been quietly acquiring technology companies for the past decade, not through direct purchase, but through shell corporations and holding companies. They identify innovative technologies with disruptive potential, acquire them, and then either commercialize them on their terms or bury them entirely if they threaten existing profit centers. I opened the folder to find documentation of multiple acquisitions across various sectors, all ultimately tracing back to Archer Global. And Vertex is one of these shell corporations? Mitchell's laugh held no humor. Hardly. Vertex is very much a real company with its own objectives. But we compete in spaces where Archer operates, which means we notice patterns they'd prefer remained invisible. You still haven't explained what this has to do with Meridian, I pointed out, though a troubling suspicion was beginning to form. 3 months ago, Archer representatives approached your brother with an offer, not for Meridian directly, but for specific technologies held by a company called Riverstone Technologies. Your father's private holding company. I kept my expression neutral despite my surprise. How do you know this? Because they approached us first, and we declined. Mitchell's eyes narrowed slightly. Meridian's water purification and renewable energy technologies have disruptive potential in markets where Archer has significant investments. They wanted those technologies controlled or eliminated. And when you refused to be their proxy, they found someone more amenable. Someone who could access Riverstone from the inside. The implications were staggering. If Mitchell was telling the truth, Alex hadn't been working to take control of Meridian for his own ambition, or even for Vertex's benefit, but as part of a larger scheme orchestrated by Archer Global. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, studying her carefully. "Corporate espionage isn't typically shared with competitors." Mitchell closed her briefcase with a decisive click. "Because Archer's approach to innovation is fundamentally destructive. They don't create, they acquire and control. Companies like Meridian and Vertex survive by actual innovation, by creating technologies that solve real problems. If Archer succeeds in their broader strategy, the entire industry suffers." It was a surprisingly principled position from someone with Kendra Mitchell's cutthroat reputation. I wasn't entirely convinced her motives were as altruistic as she presented them, but the information aligned too well with the patterns I'd observed to dismiss outright. "Do you have actual evidence of Archer's involvement with my brother?" I asked. "Nothing that would stand up in court," Mitchell admitted. "But the pattern matches their standard approach perfectly. Identify key technologies, isolate them through corporate restructuring, then acquire them through seemingly unrelated transactions." The board meeting would begin soon, and I needed time to process this information. "I'll look into this," I said finally. "But I'm not convinced Vertex's interest in Meridian is as benign as you're suggesting." Mitchell smiled as she stood to leave. "I never claimed it was benign. Vertex still wants Meridian's commercial technologies, just not at the expense of burying innovations that could benefit millions of people." She handed me a small business card. "My direct line: when you're ready to discuss how we might work together against Archer, call me." After she left, I sat in silence, turning over this new information. If Mitchell was telling the truth, Alex wasn't simply trying to wrest control of Meridian for his own benefit, or even for a straightforward acquisition. He was caught in something much larger and potentially more dangerous. A scheme by one of the world's largest corporations to control technologies that threaten their existing business models. The question was whether Alex was a willing participant or, as Lowell had suggested, under some kind of pressure. And more importantly, how this information might help me not just save Meridian, but potentially my brother as well. The laptop chimed, reminding me that the emergency board meeting would begin in 15 minutes. I straightened in bed, mentally, preparing for what promised to be a pivotal confrontation. The board meeting began promptly at 2:00. Through my hospital room's secure video connection, I could see the familiar conference room where, just days earlier, I'd confronted Alex in person. Now the same walnut table was surrounded by the board members, their faces tense with the gravity of the situation. Alex sat at one end, his expression carefully controlled but with visible strain around his eyes. Howard occupied a chair near the door, legal documents neatly arranged before him. Chairman Lowell called the meeting to order with his customary efficiency. "As you're all aware, we've convened this emergency session to address two critical matters: the disputed succession documents and the financial irregularities identified in our preliminary audit. Mr. Bennett has provided a forensic analysis of the will that Mr. Alexander Mercer presented to this board. Mr. Bennett, would you summarize your findings?" Howard stood, professional and authoritative. "The document examination conclusively demonstrates that the signature on the will presented by Mr. Alexander Mercer was not executed by James Mercer. The variations in pressure points, letter formation, and terminal strokes are inconsistent with authenticated signatures from the same period. In layman's terms, it's a forgery." Murmurs rippled through the room. Alex's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. "We also have a sworn statement from Victor Prentice," Howard continued, "acknowledging his role in creating this fraudulent document at Mr. Alexander Mercer's explicit direction. I've provided copies to each board member." The statement I'd received from Victor had indeed proven comprehensive, detailing not just his role in the forgery, but Alex's specific instructions and timeline. A devastating piece of evidence. Dr. Jenkins spoke first, her voice thick with disappointment. "Alex, Wish to respond to these allegations? All eyes turned to my brother, who sat unnaturally still for a moment before straightening his shoulders. The succession situation is complicated. I believed I was acting in accordance with my father's wishes. By forging his signature? Rajiv Washington asked bluntly. By ensuring his true intentions were honored, Alex countered, his voice hardening. My father expressed concerns about Meridian's direction in his final weeks. Concerns that the focus on humanitarian projects was undermining our commercial viability. The company needed decisive leadership. It was a weak defense, and from the board members' expressions, none of them were buying it. Chairman Lowell moved the discussion forward. The forensic evidence and Mr. Prentice's statement leave little room for interpretation. The succession documents presented by Ms. Eleanor Mercer appear to be authentic and legally binding. These established joint leadership between both Mercer siblings, with neither having unilateral authority to pursue major transactions, such as the proposed Vertex acquisition. He turned to face the camera, addressing me directly. Ms. Mercer, do you wish to comment before we vote on formally recognizing these succession arrangements? This was the moment to reclaim my rightful position at Meridian, to secure Dad's legacy. Yet the information Mitchell had shared gave me pause. If Alex was indeed entangled with Archer Global, simply removing him from power might not solve the deeper threat. I stand by the authenticity of my father's true succession plan, I said carefully. He believed in balanced leadership between Alex and myself, combining our different strengths. I remain committed to that vision. I took a breath, then added, however, before the board votes, I believe we should address the financial irregularities that have been identified. Those may shed light on the motivations behind the succession dispute. Lowell nodded, seemingly pleased with this direction. Indeed. Our financial committee has completed a preliminary review of transactions since James Mercer's passing. Ms. Reynolds, would you present the findings? Diane Reynolds, a retired financial analyst who had served on Meridian's board for nearly a decade, took the floor. Her presentation was methodical and damning, detailing the systematic redirection of funds from sustainable projects to commercial research, followed by suspicious payments to unverifiable consulting companies. In total, she concluded, approximately $1.2 million has been diverted through these channels over the past 4 months. All authorizations bear Mr. Alexander Mercer's signature. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Financial impropriety of this magnitude wasn't just an internal company matter, it potentially crossed into criminal territory. Alex, Chairman Lowell said quietly, I believe it's time for a full explanation. My brother's composure finally cracked. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like our father's that it momentarily startled me, and let out a long breath. It's not what you think, he said, his voice strained. The funds weren't for personal benefit. I was managing a situation. What situation justifies misappropriating company funds? Dr. Jenkins asked. Alex's eyes flicked toward the camera, toward me, then back to the board. I received certain information about Riverstone Technologies after my father's death, information that suggested Meridian's most valuable patents might be vulnerable. Vulnerable how? Lowell pressed. To be acquired by outside interests, specifically by Archer Global. The name dropped into the room like a stone into still water, sending ripples of reaction across the board members' faces. Several exchanged glances that suggested this wasn't the first time they'd heard concerns about the multinational conglomerate. What does Archer Global have to do with Meridian? Washington asked. Alex hesitated, clearly calculating how much to reveal. Archer has been systematically acquiring technologies that compete with their existing businesses, not directly, but through shell companies and intermediaries. Their primary interest is in controlling innovation that might disrupt their current profit centers. And Meridian's sustainable technologies would qualify as disruptive, Lowell stated rather than asked. Precisely. particularly the new water filtration system and the low-cost solar generation technology. Both could undermine Archer's existing infrastructure investments in developing regions. I watched my brother carefully as he spoke. This aligned with Mitchell's information, but coming from Alex himself, it carried more weight and raised more questions. That still doesn't explain the financial diversions, Reynolds pointed out, or the succession dispute. I was approached by Archer representatives shortly after Dad's death, Alex continued. They were persistent about acquiring specific technologies held by Riverstone. Did they threaten you? I asked, breaking my silence. Alex's gaze met mine through the camera. Not explicitly. They made it clear that Riverstone's patents were vulnerable to legal challenges that would be expensive and potentially damaging to defend. They offered an elegant solution. Sell the specific technologies they were concerned about, retain everything else. And you considered this? Howard's disbelief was evident. Initially, no, Alex replied, surprising me. I told them Riverstone's technologies weren't for sale at any price. That's when things escalated. They began applying pressure, subtle at first, then more direct, suggesting that certain regulatory bodies might take interest in Meridian's international operations, implying that key clients might suddenly reconsider their contracts. Blackmail, Dr. Jenkins stated flatly. Corporate leverage, Alex corrected with a grimace. They're too sophisticated for anything that could be proven as criminal. But the message was clear. Cooperate or suffer consequences that would damage Meridian far beyond the specific technologies they wanted. And the money? Reynolds persisted. The diverted funds? A holding pattern, Alex admitted. I needed time to assess our options, to find leverage against Archer. The shell companies were a way to temporarily secure funds while I developed a strategy. Every cent can be accounted for. None of it went to personal use. I found myself believing him despite everything. The explanation made a certain sense, a desperate maneuver to buy time while under pressure from a powerful adversary. But it still didn't explain everything. Why not bring this to the board? Lowell asked, voicing my own question. Why the secrecy? The forged will? The rushed acquisition by Vertex? Alex's expression darkened. Archer has connections throughout the industry, including with certain board members of companies they target. His gaze swept the room, leaving unspoken the implication that someone present might have Archer ties. As for Vertex, that was a miscalculation on my part. Explain, Lowell demanded. I approached Kendra Mitchell about a strategic partnership, a way to strengthen our position against Archer. She saw an opportunity for full acquisition instead. Alex's mouth twisted wryly. Corporate predators recognize opportunity when they see it. That's not entirely accurate, I interjected, deciding it was time to share what I'd learned. Mitchell approached me earlier today with information about Archer's tactics. According to her, Archer approached Vertex first about acquiring Meridian's sustainable technologies, and Vertex declined. This was clearly news to Alex. He straightened in his chair, reassessing the situation. Mitchell told you this? I nodded. She claims Vertex opposes Archer's approach to innovation, acquiring and controlling technologies rather than developing them. She suggested an alliance against Archer might be possible. And you believe her? Alex's skepticism was evident. I believe her information aligns with patterns we've observed, I replied carefully. Whether her motives are as altruistic as she claims is another matter. Howard cleared his throat. While this context is certainly illuminating, it doesn't excuse the financial improprieties or the forged succession documents. Those remain serious violations of corporate governance and potentially criminal acts. He was right, of course. Understanding Alex's motives didn't erase his actions. Yet the situation had clearly evolved beyond a simple power struggle between siblings or even a questionable acquisition attempt. We were facing a coordinated effort by one of the world's largest corporations to control technologies that could help millions of people. Chairman Lowell seemed to recognize the shift as well. Given these revelations, I believe we need to reconsider our approach. This is no longer simply about succession or financial propriety, though those remain serious concerns. We're potentially facing a deliberate attempt by Archer Global to undermine Meridian's operations and acquire our most valuable intellectual property through coercion. What are you suggesting? Washington asked. A two-pronged approach, Lowell replied. First, we formally recognize the legitimate succession plan establishing Eleanor and Alexander Mercer as joint leaders of Meridian, with the supermajority requirement for major decisions. Second, we established a special committee to investigate the Archer situation and develop a strategic response. And the financial irregularities? Reynolds pressed. Lowell glanced at Alex, his expression stern but not without compassion. Those must be addressed. However, context matters, and if Mr. Mercer can demonstrate that the diverted funds remain intact and were not used for personal gain, that would significantly mitigate the situation. Every cent is accounted for, Alex repeated firmly. I can provide full documentation. The board members exchanged glances, silently assessing this proposed path forward. One by one, they nodded their agreement. Very well, Lowell said. Let's proceed to a formal vote on recognizing the legitimate succession documents. The vote was unanimous. With that single action, the leadership structure my father had intended was restored. Alex and I as equal partners in Meridian's future. Neither able to make major decisions without the other's agreement. Now, Lowell continued, regarding the Archer situation, Ms. Mercer, given your current medical condition, how soon do you anticipate returning to active duty at Meridian? I'm being discharged tomorrow, I said, surprising even myself with the decision. I'll need to continue recovery, but I can begin limited work immediately. Dr. Sharma would likely have strong words about this plan, but some situations couldn't wait for ideal medical timing. Good, Lowell nodded, because it appears we have a significant threat to address, and Meridian will need both of its leaders fully engaged. As the meeting moved on to establishing the special committee, I found myself studying Alex through the video feed. My brother sat straighter now, some of the tension gone from his shoulders. Not relieved exactly, but perhaps less burdened by secrets. When he glanced toward the camera, our eyes met briefly. In that moment, something passed between us. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps understanding. We had both been trying to protect Dad's legacy in our own ways. Now we would need to find a way to do it together, against an adversary far more formidable than either of us had imagined. The battle for Meridian had entered a new phase, one that would require all the innovation, strategic thinking, and determination both Mercer siblings could muster. 3 months later, I stood at the window of what had once been Dad's office, now a shared space where Alex and I both worked, honoring the joint leadership our father had envisioned. The Seattle skyline stretched before me, rain streaming down the glass in rivulets that mirrored the challenging path we'd traveled. My physical recovery had progressed steadily, though. Dr. Sharma still insisted I use a cane for longer walks. The emotional recovery, rebuilding trust with Alex, processing Dad's death, accepting the new reality of Meridian, had been more complex, but equally steady. The door opened behind me, and Alex entered carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He'd developed this habit in recent weeks, bringing afternoon coffee as a pretext for our informal strategy sessions. A small gesture of normalcy in what had been an extraordinary time. Mitchell's team just confirmed, he said, handing me a mug. Archer's backing off their patent challenge. Apparently, having their tactics exposed to 3 of their major investors was sufficiently persuasive. I allowed myself a small smile of satisfaction. Amazing how quickly corporate predators retreat when the light hits them. Our strategy against Archer had been multi-pronged. While our legal team defended Riverstone's patents, Howard had quietly approached key Archer investors with documented evidence of the company's coercive tactics. Simultaneously, we'd formed a strategic alliance with Vertex and two other technology firms to create a united front against Archer's acquisition attempts. The board is pleased, Alex continued, settling into one of the chairs near the window. Lowell called it a masterclass in corporate defense. It's not over, I cautioned. Archer will regroup, find another angle. Companies like that don't simply give up on acquisitions they want. No, Alex agreed. But we've bought time and created consequences for their approach. That's a significant victory. He wasn't wrong. In just 3 months, we'd not only fended off Archer's immediate threat, but strengthened Meridian's position considerably. The sustainable technology projects were back on track, fully funded and progressing rapidly. The Meridian Pure S200 water filtration system had moved from prototype to production, with the first units already deployed in regions struggling with water access. Dad would be proud, I said softly, almost to myself. Alex was quiet for a moment. Of you, certainly. Of us, I corrected, turning to face him directly. This is exactly what he wanted, both of us leading together, balancing each other's perspectives. You were right about some things, Alex. We did need stronger commercial positioning. I was too focused on humanitarian projects without enough attention to financial sustainability. It had taken time and considerable effort, but we'd gradually found a working balance. Alex's financial acumen and strategic thinking complementing my innovation focus and commitment to Meridian's ethical foundation. And you were right about the soul of the company, he acknowledged. Sustainable technologies aren't just morally satisfying projects, they're our future. The commercial applications emerging from the filtration system alone could transform our market position. This was the most significant shift in our dynamic, the growing mutual respect for each other's strengths, the recognition that Dad had been right about the wisdom of balanced leadership. I've been thinking, I said, setting down my coffee mug, about what Dad wrote in his letter to me, that I should use the Riverstone leverage not to punish you, but to preserve what we've built. Alex tensed slightly. The letter had been a point of contention between us, evidence that Dad had trusted me with information he'd withheld from Alex. He knew, I continued carefully, not about Archer specifically, but that someday Meridian would face this kind of challenge, that our most valuable innovations would make us a target. And he prepared for it, Alex said, a hint of admiration in his voice despite the lingering hurt. The hidden safe, the separate holding company, the balanced succession plan. He was always 3 steps ahead. Not always, I countered, reaching for the small wooden box I'd placed on the desk earlier. He didn't anticipate dying so suddenly, or how his absence would affect us both. I opened the box, removing an envelope I'd found the previous week, while finally sorting through Dad's personal effects at his house. It was addressed to both Alex and me, dated just 1 day before his heart attack. I found this in his study, I explained, handing it to Alex. It was in the desk drawer, not the safe. I think he meant to give it to us directly. Alex took the envelope with visible trepidation. Have you read it? No, I said honestly. It's addressed to both of us. I thought we should read it together. He studied my face for a moment, perhaps searching for deception, then carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single page written in Dad's distinctive handwriting. Alex held it so we could both read it. My dear Alex and Ellie, if you're reading. We've had the conversation I've been putting off for too long. Running Meridian has been the great joy of my life, but the time has come to look toward its future. A future that belongs to both of you. I've watched you grow into extraordinarily capable individuals, each brilliant in your own way. Alex, your strategic mind and financial acumen have strengthened Meridian immeasurably. Ellie, your innovative spirit and unwavering commitment to our mission have kept us true to our purpose. Together, you represent everything Meridian stands for: profit with purpose, innovation with integrity, commercial success with social impact. I've structured the succession to require collaboration between you, not as a constraint, but as recognition of a fundamental truth. Neither perspective is complete on its own. The tensions between your different approaches aren't weaknesses to be resolved, but a dynamic balance that will keep Meridian strong against forces that would compromise our values for quick gains. Trust each other, challenge each other, and remember that Meridian's greatest asset has never been its patents or profits, but the principle that engineering excellence can serve humanity while building a sustainable business. With pride in who you are and faith in what you'll become, Dad, we sat in silence after reading, both absorbing the words Dad had written in his final days, the guidance he'd intended to deliver in person but never got the chance to share. He always saw us clearly, Alex said finally, his voice rough, with emotion. Both our strengths and our blind spots. I nodded, feeling a complex mixture of grief and gratitude. And he built Meridian to need both of us, not because either of us was insufficient alone, but because together we're more than the sum of our parts. Through the window, the rain had stopped, sunlight breaking through the clouds to illuminate the city. It seemed fitting, a visual representation of where we found ourselves after months of conflict and challenge. Meridian was secure for now. The legitimate succession was established, Archer's immediate threat neutralized, the company's innovative path restored. There would be other challenges ahead, other corporate predators, other difficult decisions requiring us to balance profit and purpose. But standing in Dad's office, our office now, I felt a certainty that had eluded me since waking in that hospital bed months earlier. We would face those challenges as Dad had intended. Together, each bringing our unique strengths to preserve and build upon his legacy. Not just the company he had created, but the values it represented. Engineering excellence with integrity, innovation that mattered, technology that served humanity while building a sustainable business. The hidden documents had revealed more than just Dad's succession plan. They had revealed his wisdom about what Meridian needed to thrive. And now, despite everything, that vision was becoming reality. The true inheritance wasn't Meridian itself, but the blueprint for leading it forward. A blueprint my brother and I were finally ready to follow, together. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.